The night my empire crumbled wasn't when I lost everything, it was when I discovered the people closest to me had been pulling the strings all along. I thought I was fighting enemies outside, but the deadliest betrayal was sitting at my own table. My name is Valeria Quinn, and this is the story of how I turned betrayal into vengeance before it consumed me alive. I never imagined that my life could change so drastically with a single choice, a single moment when the lines between love, loyalty, betrayal, and danger would blur so completely that even I wouldn't recognize the reflection staring back at me. My name is Valeria Quinn. I'm 31 years old, and what I'm about to tell you isn't some carefully rehearsed story. It's the truth of how I lost everything, how I loved recklessly, and how I learned that trust is the most fragile currency we have. When I look back now, I can trace everything to one evening, a seemingly ordinary night that became the opening chapter of my unraveling. The city lights were glowing like scattered diamonds across the dark sky, the air thick with the hum of traffic and the faint smell of rain that hadn't yet fallen. I had just finished a long day at my design firm, exhausted but too restless to go home. Something inside me, a gnawing instinct, a whisper, told me that the world I thought was mine was already beginning to slip away. I stopped at a small bar tucked between two towering office buildings. It was the kind of place you'd miss if you didn't know it was there, with dark wooden beams and a soft jazz band playing in the corner. I ordered a glass of red wine and sat by the window, staring out at the blurred silhouettes of strangers rushing through the night. That was when he walked in. His presence pulled the air taut the moment he stepped inside. Tall, sharply dressed in a charcoal suit, his expression unreadable but magnetic in its intensity. He scanned the room briefly, then his eyes caught mine. I should have looked away. I should have returned to my quiet corner of anonymity. But I didn't. That was the night I met Damien Cross. He wasn't the kind of man you simply noticed. He was the kind of man who consumed all the space in the room without even trying. When he sat across from me, it felt less like chance and more like inevitability. His voice was smooth, low, with a dangerous edge hidden beneath the calm. "You look like someone who's trying to disappear," he said, the faintest curve of a smile on his lips. "And you look like someone who doesn't take no for an answer," I replied before I could stop myself. His laughter was quiet, almost like a secret, and something about it unsettled me. That night stretched on longer than I intended, our conversation weaving between casual banter and unsettlingly deep confessions. He asked about my work, my dreams, my fears, and unlike most people, he actually listened. I told myself it was nothing more than a chance encounter, two strangers passing the time. But deep down, I knew better. That night, I walked away with his number saved in my phone, my heart pounding with a thrill I couldn't quite explain. If I had known what Damien truly was, the secrets he carried, the lies he cloaked himself in, I would have deleted that number. I would have erased him before he ever became a part of me. But fate, or perhaps my own recklessness, had already decided otherwise. The days after that stormy night slipped into a rhythm I hadn't expected. My work demanded my attention, deadlines creeping closer, clients expecting miracles, and yet, my mind kept drifting back to Adrian, the mysterious stranger who had appeared out of the shadows, spoken with a mix of warning and concern, and left me reeling. I tried to dismiss it as a fleeting encounter, the kind that flickers in your memory like a dream before dissolving. But every time I walked down the street, every time I caught a reflection in a window, I wondered if he was watching me again. The thought should have terrified me, but instead it stirred something I didn't want to name: curiosity, maybe even longing. My friends noticed the distraction. At dinner one evening, Mara leaned across the table, her dark curls bouncing as she arched an eyebrow. "You've been staring into space for the last 10 minutes, Vel, spill it." I forced a laugh, swirling the wine in my glass. "Just work stress. You know how it is." "Work stress doesn't make you blush," she teased, narrowing her eyes. "There's someone, isn't there?" I shook my head too quickly, but Mara was relentless. "Oh, I see it. That look. Who is he?" How could I explain Adrian when I barely understood him myself?
So I lied. No one.
Really? Just tired. But even as I said it, the memory of his voice, the low, urgent tone, The way his eyes had locked onto mine, as if he could see right through me, flooded back, and I had to glance away before Mara could catch the truth in my expression. That night, lying in bed, I let my thoughts unravel. I had always prided myself on control, on shaping my life with precision, never letting emotions cloud my judgment. Yet Adrian had shattered that discipline in a matter of minutes. Why did his warning haunt me? What danger did he think I was in? And more importantly, why did he care? The following week, the city seemed to pulse with a strange energy. I began noticing small things. An envelope slipped under my apartment door with no sender, containing only a blank sheet of paper. A car idles too long across from my building. A faint sense of footsteps behind me when I walked home late. I told myself I was imagining it, paranoia fed by his cryptic words. Still, unease gnawed at me. It was during one of those restless nights, when sleep evaded me, that I found myself on the rooftop of my building. The city stretched below in a tapestry of lights, beautiful and indifferent. I wrapped my arms around myself, the cool breeze brushing against my skin, and tried to steady my breathing. Couldn't sleep either? The voice startled me, but I didn't turn. I knew who it was before I saw him. Adrian stepped out of the shadows, as though he belonged there, as though the night had summoned him. "You can't keep appearing like this," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "It's unnerving." He came closer, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. "And yet, you don't walk away." I hated that he was right. I should have demanded answers, called the police, something. But instead, I stayed rooted, caught between fear and fascination. "What do you want from me?" I asked. His expression darkened, the smile fading. "To keep you alive." The words landed like a stone in my chest. Alive? What are you talking about? People are watching you, Valeria. People who don't mean well. You've stumbled into something without realizing it. And if you're not careful, he trailed off, his gaze shifting toward the skyline as if measuring the weight of what he should reveal. "Then tell me," I pressed, my voice rising. "Tell me what's happening instead of these riddles." He looked at me then, and for the first time, I saw something raw in his eyes. Fear. Not for himself, but for me. "The less you know, the safer you are." I shook my head, frustration bubbling. "That's not good enough. You don't get to barge into my life, terrify me with half-truths, and then disappear." His jaw clenched, and he took a step closer. I could feel the heat radiating from him, the intensity of his presence pressing against me. "You're stronger than you think, Valeria. But strength alone won't save you. You need to trust me." The rooftop air thickened with silence.
Trust.
That was the word hanging between us, heavy and impossible. I barely knew him, yet something deep within me recognized a thread of honesty in his voice. Against all reason, I wanted to believe him. But before I could answer, a distant sound shattered the moment, a sharp crack, like glass breaking. Adrian's head snapped toward the street below, his body instantly tensed. "We're not alone," he muttered. He grabbed my hand, and before I could protest, he was pulling me toward the stairwell. My heart pounded as we raced down the steps, his grip firm. When we reached the lobby, he paused, scanning the shadows with practiced precision. "What's happening?" I whispered. "Later. Right now we move." Outside, the street was eerily quiet. Adrian guided me quickly down the block, his eyes darting to every corner, every flicker of movement. My pulse hammered, fear mingling with adrenaline. I should have been terrified of him, but instead, I clung to the strange certainty that he was the only thing standing between me and something far worse. When we finally ducked into a dimly lit alley, he pressed me against the wall, his breath ragged. "They're closer than I thought," he said.
"Who?"
My voice trembled. His eyes locked onto mine, and for a fleeting moment, all the fear dissolved into something else, something dangerous. His face was inches from mine, the tension vibrating between us, a pull I couldn't deny. And then he said it, low and steady. "The people who killed your father." The ground seemed to vanish beneath me. My father's death had always been explained as an accident, tragic, sudden, but ordinary. Now Adrian's words cracked that truth wide open, and everything I thought I knew about my past fractured with it. I opened my mouth to demand answers, but before I could speak, Adrian stepped back, his gaze sharp. Not here. Not now. But I promise, Valeria, I'll tell you everything. And in that instant, I realized two things with terrifying clarity. I was in far deeper than I'd ever imagined, and whether I liked it or not, my life was no longer my own. The storm had only just begun. When I left the balcony that night, my mind was in knots. The truth I'd uncovered in those emails, those cold, digital ghosts of betrayal, wouldn't stop replaying in my head. Each word was like a blade, carving deeper into the fragile trust one thought I had left. It wasn't just about the business deal. It was about the lies, the manipulation, and the terrifying realization that I was being played like a pawn in a much larger game. I barely slept. The rain pounded against my windows, as if the world itself was warning me. By morning, I had made a decision. I couldn't stay paralyzed in fear. I couldn't let them destroy me quietly. If they wanted to corner me, I would find the cracks in their plans. I showered, dressed, and forced down a cup of bitter coffee. My hand still shook as I scrolled through my phone, but I kept replaying the same thought. If I stay reactive, I lose. If I become proactive, maybe, just maybe, I can survive this. The first call I made that morning was to Adrian. He answered on the second ring, his voice groggy but steady. Valeria? It's early. Are you okay? I hesitated. The silence between us stretched for a beat too long. I need your help, I finally said. But before you agree, you should know this. If you stand with me, you'll be pulled into something dangerous. Something that might ruin you, too. Adrian exhaled softly, then said, You already know my answer. Where are you? I'll come to you. A lump rose in my throat. For the first time in days, I felt something other than fear, hope. We met at a small cafe on the east side of the city, the kind of place where the smell of fresh bread masked the scent of desperation. I chose a corner booth, my back against the wall, so I could see every person who walked in. Old paranoia, maybe, but I couldn't help it. When Adrian slid into the booth across from me, his eyes searched mine immediately. You look like you haven't slept. I haven't, I admitted. I slid my phone across the table, open to the files I had discovered. He scrolled, frowning deeper with each swipe. Valeria, this isn't just betrayal, he whispered, leaning closer so no one could overhear. This is a conspiracy. They're laundering money, moving assets through shell companies, setting up deals offshore. And if they tied your name into this... They already did. I cut him off, my voice sharp. My signature was forged on at least 2 contracts. If this goes public, I'll be painted as complicit. The woman who helped them build an empire of lies. Adrian leaned back, running a hand through his hair.
No.
Not if we move first. We gather everything. Evidence, witnesses, anything that proves you weren't involved. If we can get ahead of this, you won't just clear your name, you'll bring them down. The intensity in his eyes sent a chill down my spine. Part of me wanted to believe him, to surrender the crushing weight I'd been carrying. But another part whispered warnings. What if Adrian has his own agenda? What if trusting him is another mistake? Still, I nodded. Then we start tonight. The following days blurred together into a haze of strategy, late-night drives, and whispered phone calls. Adrian and I moved like shadows, gathering fragments of truth wherever we could. But the deeper we dug, the darker the trail became. One night, while combing through old company archives stored in a rented warehouse, Adrian froze. He pulled out a dusty ledger and placed it on the table between us. Look at this, he said, his voice tight. The pages were filled with names, dates, and coded transactions. But one detail stood out. Repeated transfers linked to an account under the alias Val Quinn. My blood ran cold. That's me. Or, it looks like me. They've been planning this for years, Adrian muttered, his jaw tightening. They built a paper trail in your name long before you had a chance to defend yourself. The walls seemed to close in around me. Every breath felt shallow. I'm trapped, I whispered. No matter what I do, the evidence points back to me. Adrian reached across the table, his hand covering mine. His warmth anchored me, pulling me back from the spiral. You're not trapped, Valeria. You're targeted. There's a difference. and we'll use that difference to fight back. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that together, we could rewrite the story they'd written for me. But as I looked into his eyes, I couldn't shake the thought, what if he's only here because he benefits from my downfall? What if this is all just another carefully staged lie? The turning point came 3 nights later. Adrian and I had followed a lead to a private storage unit on the outskirts of town. The place reeked of mildew and secrets, the air thick with dust. Inside, rows of locked boxes lined the walls. Adrian jimmied open one of the smaller boxes, and inside we found stacks of documents, contracts, passports, photographs. Each one was tied to the network of betrayal that had ensnared me. But there was something else. A photograph of me. It was taken months ago, from a distance, in a moment I hadn't even realized I was being watched, walking alone, clutching my bag, my face shadowed by worry. My stomach dropped. They've been following me. Adrian's jaw clenched. He grabbed the photo, crumpling it in his fist. This isn't just business anymore. This is an obsession. They're not just framing you, they're hunting you. I staggered back, my knees weak. The storage walls felt like they were closing in. Why me, Adrian? Why am I the one they want to destroy? He didn't answer right away. His silence gnawed at me, and in that silence, a terrifying possibility bloomed. Does he already know the answer? Before I could press him, the sound of footsteps echoed outside the unit. Heavy. Approaching. Adrian's eyes snapped to mine. We need to go.
Now.
He grabbed my hand, pulling me into the shadows as the lock on the outer door rattled. My heart thundered in my chest as the footsteps drew closer. We slipped out the back, sprinting through the night like fugitives. And in that moment, breathless, terrified, clutching Adrian's hand, I realized the truth. I was no longer fighting for my reputation. I was fighting for my life. The silence in Adrian's apartment that night felt unnatural, like a pause between lightning and thunder. Every shadow seemed thicker than usual, every creak of the floorboards like a whisper of warning. I sat at the small kitchen table, my fingertips lightly grazing the rim of a glass of untouched water. Adrian had retreated to the study to work on something he refused to share with me yet, and although he insisted it was for my safety, the mystery gnawed at me. I hated being kept in the dark, but a part of me understood. I had been thrown into a storm that had begun long before I even realized it existed. My instincts told me to demand answers, but my heart told me to trust him. Still, my thoughts kept drifting to Elena, the woman who had appeared at the cafe earlier, cloaked in charm and menace. Her smile was too smooth, her voice too careful, her eyes too sharp. She wasn't just some random acquaintance of Adrian's. She knew things. She had seen things. And I was certain her presence was no coincidence. By midnight, Adrian emerged from the study, his face shadowed by exhaustion. His eyes found mine immediately, softening in that way that made me forget how dangerous he was, how dangerous we both were now. You should try to sleep, he said gently. I can't. My voice cracked with tension. Not when I know you're hiding something from me. He froze, leaning against the doorway. For a long moment, the only sound between us was the hum of the refrigerator. Then, finally, he walked toward me, dragging a chair so close our knees brushed. You're right, he admitted. I've been keeping things from you. Not because I want to, but because telling you puts you at even greater risk. But after tonight, after Elena, he rubbed his jaw, hesitation flickering across his features. You deserve the truth. My pulse quickened. This was it. The moment when the shadows might finally part, if only slightly. Adrian took a deep breath. Years ago, before I left the city, I was part of something, an operation, a network, that dealt with information no one should ever have. Secrets that could dismantle corporations, expose government lies, ruin powerful people. I was good at it. Too good. And when I wanted out, when I realized how dark it all was, they didn't let me leave. No one leaves. My skin prickled. And Elena? He nodded grimly. She's part of it. Or at least she was. If she's resurfaced now, it means they know where I am. Which means his eyes locked onto mine. They know about you. The words slammed into me like a physical blow. I suddenly felt exposed, as though unseen eyes were crawling over every inch of me, marking me as a target. I never wanted this life for you, Valeria, he whispered, reaching for my hand. His grip was strong, grounding. But you're in it now, whether either of us likes it or not. And if I'm going to keep you safe, I need you to trust me completely. I should have run. Every rational part of me screamed to pack my bag and leave that very second, to never look back. But instead, I found myself whispering, I do trust you. Something shifted in his eyes then. Something both fierce and vulnerable. He leaned in, his forehead brushing mine, and for a fleeting moment, the storm outside us ceased. His lips found mine, soft but urgent, a kiss that tasted of both desperation and promise. But it couldn't last. Because at that very moment, a sharp knock rattled the front door. Adrian stiffened instantly, pulling away. His body became steel, his expression cold and alert. He motioned for me to stay put as he silently crossed the room. The knock came again, harder this time. My heart pounded against my ribs. "Who is it?" Adrian demanded. A pause. Then a voice, muffled but eerily familiar. "It's me. Elena." I gasped. Adrian shot me a look that screamed for silence. He opened the door just enough to see her standing there in a sleek black coat, her hair damp from the rain, her expression unreadable. "We need to talk," she said, her eyes flicking toward me before settling on Adrian.
Now.
Adrian didn't invite her in, but she pushed her way inside anyway, like she owned the space. The tension in the room thickened instantly, every molecule charged with hostility. Her gaze swept over me, lingering with unsettling curiosity. "So this is her," Elena said smoothly. "The reason you've been hiding." "Leave her out of this," Adrian snapped. But Elena only smiled, a sharp curve of lips that carried no warmth. "You know it doesn't work like that. She's already involved, whether she wants to be or not." I forced myself to speak, my voice trembling but defiant. "Why don't you just say what you came here to say?" Her eyes narrowed, amusement sparking in their depths. "Bold. I like that." She turned back to Adrian. "They've given you one last chance. Come back, finish what you started, and maybe they'll forget she ever existed. Refuse," her smile darkened, "and neither of you will be safe." The silence that followed was suffocating. I watched Adrian's jaw tighten, his fists clench at his sides. I could almost see the war raging inside him. Finally, he said, "Get out." For the first time, Elena's mask faltered. Her eyes hardened, and for a moment, I thought she might attack right there. But then she smirked, shrugged, and walked toward the door. As she left, she looked back at me and said softly, "Be careful, Valeria. You have no idea what he's capable of." The door clicked shut, leaving behind a silence, so heavy it pressed on my chest. I turned to Adrian, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. His shoulders sagged as though the weight of the world had finally crushed him. And in that moment, I realized the most terrifying truth of all. I didn't know if I was safer with him or without him. I couldn't remember the last time I had felt truly steady on my own 2 feet. Maybe it was before the betrayals, before the whispered lies and buried secrets clawed their way into daylight. Or maybe it was never. Maybe I'd only convinced myself I had control. Now, standing at the edge of the truth, I realized how fragile that illusion had always been. The silence in my apartment that night felt too heavy to be trusted. I kept hearing echoes of voices in my mind, Lucian's soft promises, Damon's sharp-edged warnings, and the laughter of those who had played me like a piece on their board. I should have felt broken. Instead, I felt sharp, awake, like someone who had been walking through fog and had finally found solid ground. The folder lay open on my table, its papers splayed like wounds that refused to close. Every document screamed betrayal. Business records showing transactions tied to people I once considered allies, notes scribbled in familiar handwriting revealing plots I had never imagined, and photographs, God, those photographs, capturing moments where my trust had been shattered without my knowing. But what shook me the most wasn't the proof of deceit. It was the realization that the game wasn't over. In fact, it was only just beginning. Damon's words replayed in my head. You don't know the half of it, Valeria. When the truth comes, it won't just take pieces of your past. It'll demand your future. For hours, I stared at the evidence, trying to thread connections between names, dates, and faces. My mind spun like a wheel stuck in mud. Then I saw it, a single detail, almost insignificant, circled faintly in blue ink on one of the papers. An address. A remote estate outside the city, one I knew I'd never visited. The kind of place where secrets were meant to be locked away. And suddenly I understood. If I wanted answers, real ones, not half-truths delivered in whispers, I had to go there. Alone. The drive out of the city felt like slipping between worlds. Streetlights bled into darkness, skyscrapers giving way to jagged trees and empty roads. The further I went, the heavier the air became, until it felt like even my lungs resisted the journey. By the time I reached the estate, night had fully swallowed the horizon. The house loomed ahead, massive, old, and cruelly silent. Its windows glared like dead eyes, and its gates stood open just enough to be an invitation or a trap. I killed the engine and sat still, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles burned. My heart thundered in my chest, screaming at me to leave. But there was no leaving now. Inside my coat pocket, I felt the comforting weight of the small pistol Damon had pressed into my hand days earlier. I hated guns. I hated what they represented. But tonight, it wasn't about hate. It was about survival. When I finally stepped inside, the air smelled of dust, decay, and something faintly metallic. Blood, maybe, or the memory of it. My footsteps echoed down the long corridor, and every creak of the floorboards set my nerves on fire. I moved from room to room, finding nothing but shadows and whispers of lives that had once lingered here. And then I heard it. A voice.
Soft.
Familiar. My name, spoken like a prayer and a curse at once. Valeria. I spun around, the gun raised, and there he was, Lucien. He looked different in the half-light. Not the man who had promised me forever, not the lover who had woven tenderness into my nights. He looked older, sharper, as if the mask he had worn for me had finally cracked. You shouldn't have come here, he said quietly, stepping closer. My hand shook, but I didn't lower the weapon. You lied to me, over and over. And I believed you. His jaw tightened. I lied because I had to. Because the truth would have destroyed you long before now. Then tell me, I whispered. Tell me everything. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then he sighed, almost broken, and reached into his coat. My pulse spiked, and I nearly pulled the trigger. But instead of a weapon, he pulled out another folder, thinner than the one I'd found, but just as damning. He tossed it onto the dusty table between us. Read it, he said, and you'll finally understand who the real enemy is. The pages inside tore me apart. Everything I thought I knew about betrayal suddenly shifted, like the ground had caved beneath me. Names that had seemed innocent were poisoned with guilt. Deals I'd thought were business were, in reality, threads of a web so intricate it made my head spin. And at the center of it all was not Lucien, not Damon, but someone I had never expected. Someone whose absence in my life had always been a wound. My mother. The woman who had vanished when I was a child, leaving me with nothing but shadows and questions, wasn't lost. She wasn't dead. She was alive, and she had been orchestrating pieces of this nightmare from the start. The room tilted. My breath caught in my throat. You're lying, I said hoarsely, though the evidence in my trembling hands said otherwise. Lucien's eyes softened with something like pity. I wish I were. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at those pages, but eventually, the sound of footsteps snapped me back to reality. Heavy, deliberate, drawing closer. Lucien's expression hardened. They followed you here. Who? Before I could finish, the doors at the far end of the hall burst open. Figures spilled into the room, shadows armed with violence. And in that moment, I realized the estate wasn't just a place of secrets. It was a battleground. Lucien grabbed my arm, pulling me behind him. Run, Valeria. But I didn't run. Not this time. Not anymore. I raised the pistol, aimed, and fired. The fight had finally come to me, and I was ready. The night was colder than usual, yet I felt a fire raging inside me. The truth was finally out in the open. Every betrayal, every secret, every mask ripped away. I stood in the dimly lit hall of Blackthorn Estate, the storm outside rattling the windows like an omen. My breath was unsteady, my fists clenched at my sides. Across from me stood Adrian Blackthorn, the man I had once loved, the man who had betrayed me, and the man who was now cornered by his own greed. "You never really loved me, did you?" I whispered, my voice trembling, though my heart demanded strength. His lips curled into something between a smirk and a grimace. "Love? Love is a weakness, Valeria. You are a tool, a distraction at best." For a fleeting moment, the sting of his words cut deeper than any blade, but then something shifted inside me. All the tears, all the nights of confusion and doubt, all the moments I had questioned my worth, they solidified into a sharp clarity. "You're wrong," I said, raising my head, my voice steady now. "Love is the only reason I'm still standing. Love for myself, love for the truth, and love for what you could never corrupt." Behind Adrian, the heavy oak doors burst open. Damien strode in, his face hard with resolve, his dark eyes locking on Adrian with a fury that spoke of years of restrained rage. He wasn't alone. Several allies followed, those Adrian thought he had destroyed, but who had quietly risen against him. "You're finished, Adrian," Damien said, his voice like thunder. "The empire you built on lies ends tonight." Adrian laughed, but there was a crack in his bravado. "You think you can end me with a few documents, a few accusations? I've survived worse." Damien held up a file, evidence, undeniable proof of Adrian's crimes, every fraud, every bribe, every life destroyed by his empire. And then, for the first time, Adrian faltered. I stepped forward, closing the space between us. "The difference between you and me, Adrian, is that I never needed power to define who I am. You needed control because you were empty inside." His eyes darkened, but his silence betrayed him. The storm outside roared, lightning flashing across the windows as though the heavens themselves were delivering their verdict. Damien's voice cut through the silence. "You have two choices. Surrender, or face the world when these truths are revealed." For the first time since I had met him, Adrian seemed small. His shoulders sagged, his eyes darted between us, and the mask he had worn so perfectly began to crumble. "I should have destroyed you when I had the chance," he spat, but the venom lacked its old fire. "You already tried," I said softly, "and I'm still here." The silence that followed was heavy, final. Adrian realized he had lost, not just his empire, not just his power, but the war within himself. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned away, defeated. When the authorities came for him, I didn't watch him leave. I had no desire to see him in chains. My war was never about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life. As dawn broke, the storm cleared, painting the sky with streaks of gold and lavender. I stood outside, the cool morning air brushing against my face, and for the first time in years, I felt free. Damien stepped beside me, his presence calm, solid. He didn't say anything at first, he didn't need to. His hand brushed against mine, tentative but steady, and I allowed myself to hold on. "You did it," he said finally, his voice quiet, but filled with pride. "No," I whispered, shaking my head slightly. "We did it." He smiled, the kind of smile that wasn't rushed or forced, but real, the kind that promised something new, something worth building. For so long, I had lived in shadows, trapped between betrayal and survival. But now, I was stepping into the light of my own choosing. I glanced back at the estate, the symbol of everything Adrian had once represented, and I knew one thing for certain. His story had ended, but mine was just beginning. And yet, as Damien and I walked away, a cold thought whispered through my mind. In the shadows of Adrian's empire, there were others, silent partners, unseen hands who had helped him rise. His downfall was only the beginning. My story wasn't over. It had only just begun.